Hi everyone, I'm Marcus and I'm the lead sound designer on the Airwave project, and in this video I'm going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into some of my favourite sounds, unpacking how they work a little bit and showing you how you can really use the hand tracking based technology in Airwave to transform your expression when making music. The basic premise of the patch is that we have a really nice soft kind of sound choral ensemble on the keyboard itself. And then using the air dimensions, I can shift that vowel sound between various ones. So if I go straight up, that becomes more of an ooh sound. If I go out to the side using air glide, you get more of an ah sound. And if I use air tilt, which is this, then I get more of an E sound. And what's really nice is that I can then kind of explore this airspace, find combinations of those dimensions to create my own kind of articulations and sounds, like I'm conducting my own choir. And I can either do that slowly, or I could do that in a more staccato kind of almost percussive manner like this, which is really cool. And then, in addition to those dimensions, we have air flex, which introduces this nice kind of octave above granular delay, which sounds like this. And then I can just pull back on that by going up and down with my hands. And then finally, to stop, I can just make a fist, which will cut all the notes at once. Next up, we have a sound called Analog Ghosts, which I think might be my favourite sound that I've ever made. We have this kind of acoustic plucky sound initially at softer velocities. You can hear the kind of string noise and stuff in there. If I dig in with a bit more velocity, then we get this wave folding and some more synthesized elements coming through. If I dig in to the surface of the key wave, then I get this sustained synth lead coming in as well. And then there's all these other textures that I can bring in with the air dimensions. So if I raise my hand straight up, kind of get this ghostly, soft, thin layer. There's a more synthy layer if I go out to the side. And then there's a more kind of powerful pad-like layer when I tilt my hands out. And of course, I can use those dimensions in combination to kind of use different combinations of those layers. So really, really cool, expressive, fun sound to mess around with. Really happy with this one. Next up, we have a patch called Lonely Roads, which is another one of my favorites. At its core, it's this kind of expressive road sound. We have some nice extra layers on slide, bringing in this kind of granulated string noise. And one of my favorite things about this patch is that we can use the air dimensions not just to kind of modulate the sound, but to trigger new notes. So I can sustain some notes on the keyboard, then glide out to the side, to trigger them in that kind of higher synth voicing, which is really, really fun to mess around with. Then on air raise, we have these nice kind of choral and atmospheric layers, which we can create nice swells with. And then there's an LFO on those as well, so we can create this kind of stuttering effect by tilting our hands out, and the tilt of our hands will control the speed of that stutter. So all in all, loads of different layers of interaction and a really fun patch to play around with. Next up we have a preset called Brass Section. Airwave excels at kind of orchestral sounds, and the way that you interact with them feels very much like a conductor interacting with an orchestra. So we have a really nice, sensitive and expressive brass sound, more of a solo sound on the key wave itself. I can press in to the Seaboard surface for that breath control. I can slide up for a bit of an overblow. And then using the air dimensions, I can bring more of the ensemble in. So if I sustain some notes, and I can control those swells really naturally using the motion of my hands. If I tilt my wrist like this, then I get a really hard overblow. If I tilt my wrist down, I have vibrato. And then if I push my hands out to the sides, I bring in these other kind of swirling, semi-randomized other brass orchestral elements. You can hear that they're just adding a little bit of kind of motion in the background. And so we can combine those dimensions all together to have a really fun and expressive brass section to play around with. Next up, we have a sound called Airnet and Reed, which was made by Raphael, our principal sound designer, who goes under the name Electric Himalaya. It's this beautiful expressive synth lead that kind of shows off that Airwave is good not only for introducing these really dramatic shifts to sounds, but also more subtle ways of modulating them. It's a beautiful expressive lead sound, taking full advantage of the 5 dimensions of touch, but then expanding upon them with the air dimensions. So I can control the timbre by moving up and down, introduce a slightly more edgy texture by going out to the left or right, and then I can control another vibrato with my hand on tilt. And so you can incorporate these movements into your playing to be really, really expressive. And because Airwave is so responsive, it's just a really kind of natural means of controlling the sound. Really fun one to mess around with. Next up, we have a preset called Pots and Pans, and this is one of my absolute favorite presets that I worked on. So on the keyboard itself, we have this kind of expansive, breathy, synthy sound. We have all of our 5 dimensions of touch, so I'm controlling the kind of brightness and the volume with press. I can bring in this nice rhythmic element by sliding up. But where the magic of this patch really is when I raise my hands into the air. And one of the nice things about Airwave is that we can kind of have a completely different sound when you're in the air versus where you're on the keyboard, all within one patch. And so this transforms into this rhythmic sequence when I raise my hands into the air. And then I can add some drive to that by moving out to the side. And I can make it a little bit more percussive by tilting my hand. And then combining those together creates this kind of evolving sequence that I can really explore in the air. It works really, really nicely for kind of more electronic genres, like if you just put a driving 4/4 beat under this, you have the beginnings of a house or a techno-y type track just from one patch. Next up, we have a patch called Catch Your Breath, and this one is a more kind of electronic-focused synthesized sound. All Airwave sounds start off by being 5D sounds, which means that they have all of the Seaboard Rise's 5 dimensions of touch in addition to these new air dimensions. This patch mainly consists of this kind of sequenced synthetic sound. We have a nice use of slide to bring in this kind of vocal chop. And using the air dimensions, we can control both the timbre and the kind of rhythmic subdivisions of the sequencer. So if I raise straight up, I'm controlling the filter cutoff, and then if I use air tilt, I can control the subdivision of the sequencer. And it's really, really snappy, so you can kind of create some really interesting rhythmic subdivisions and mess around with the timing of things really nicely. And then in addition to that, you can use air glide to increase the sense of space, which is nice for creating kind of build-ups and things. Next up, we have a really interesting patch by Raphael called Quirky Technbox that transforms Airwave and Equator 2 into this all-in-one kind of techno groove box. And it really shows off how Airwave can be fun, not just for those that have really virtuosic keyboard ability, but others that want to kind of dive into more hands-on control of sound. So we have this sequence line, which I can play just by holding one note down. And then I can use the air dimensions to explore these really cool kind of variations on that core sequence. So I can go up and down. I can go out to the side. For that kind of really gnarly, kind of more pulsing bass. And I can also tilt my hand as well. And finally, I can slide up on the keyboard for another variation. So all of those things in combination can produce really kind of unpredictable and happy accident type explorations. So a really fun one to play around with. Airwave doesn't only work with ROLI hardware, it's also a great way of adding extra expression to a third-party controller. So here I have a Novation SLMKII, and this patch is called Piano O'Nipe. It's piano and piano backwards, and you'll see why. So we have this core, really nice soft piano sound. Really nice. And then what I can do is raise my hands up to introduce these reverse layers. I can push my hands out to the side to then increase the space. Create these really nice kind of ambient swells, and then using the air flex motion, which is this one, I can reverse the direction of those reverse layers to create more of a pluck than a swell. Really, really nice for kind of down-tempo, ambient style stuff. Reminds me a little bit of the soundtrack for American Beauty. Just a really, really cool, expressive, atmospheric patch. Next up, we have a really, really cool patch called Dimensional Orchestra, which is a really powerful example of how Airwave can enhance the expression you can get out of a keyboard. So again, our core sound is a fairly simple one. We have a Rhodes sound. But then using the air dimensions, I can bring in all of these extra instruments and different layers. So going straight up and down with air rays, I can introduce a woodwind layer. If I go out to the side, I can bring in some slow, soft strings. If I tilt my hand like this, I can bring in a brass layer. And then moving forward and backwards, using air slide, I can introduce a choral layer. And then of course, I can use those dimensions in combination to really kind of, on the fly, control the instrumentation that I'm playing. So there you have it. That was some of my favorite Airwave sounds, and there are many, many more to check out. If you'd like to find out more information about Airwave, please head over to ROLI.com, and thank you very much for watching.